Dr. Segar is a best-selling author of No Sweat, How the Simple Science of Motivation Can Bring You a Lifetime of Fitness, and The Joy Choice, How to Finally Achieve Lasting Changes in Healthy Eating and Exercise. And I could ask if you've read the book, but now I know that you all have the book, so we'll kind of see how, definitely give that a good read after the conference here. She is a sustainable, performs sustainable change science and directs the University of Michigan's Sustainable Health Activities Research Program. She spent the last 25 years conducting health coaching and research and translating it into sustainable behavioral change messages and programming for professionals and organizations seeking to accelerate and sustain positive change. Her comprehensive, research-based approach to create sustainable behavioral change has made her a sought-after speaker, sustainable behavior change trainer, and consultant. Michelle is passionate about helping professionals and organizations learn how to integrate the latest scientific findings into clinic-based counseling and telecoaching protocols and digital health products and practices. So give another round of applause for Dr. Segar.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you had a good lunch. It's a pleasure to be able to deliver the newest work to you, and I want to just contextualize what I'm going to talk about now from my new book, The Joy Choice, with the presentation that I gave earlier today. So if you remember, what we were really focused on was motivation and affect, and how to help patients develop the positive affect toward their healthy lifestyles that they want to adopt. That's the driver. If you don't have the positive affect, you don't have the driver. But a driver isn't enough. Being motivated, as you know, isn't enough. So I love to go to the movies. My love of going to the cinema without having COVID being in the picture is my driver. But I never go because it's not a priority. And so what I'm going to talk about next has to do with implementation and the types of things that get in the way of patients sustaining change from an implementation perspective. So that's the context for you. I'm going to start talking about things we should start doing in the future through looking back in time to ancient wisdom. And I don't know if you've heard of Aesop's fable about the oak tree and the reeds, but I'm going to tell it to you now. There was a giant, mighty oak that was by a brook. Also close by were small reeds. One day, a big storm with huge winds blew and blew, and the mighty oak tried to keep its roots in the ground and stand strong and rigid. But the reeds blew with the wind. Wow, I don't even think I need to show you the next picture for you to know what happened. After the storm, the great mighty oak got pulled out by its roots and did not survive, while the reeds, which bent in the wind, did. So this is going to be a metaphor and a concept that I'm going to pull through the entire presentation. But I want to start by asking, what are outcomes that we and our patients care about having from a health perspective? So let's just shout out a few. Wellness, okay. That's vague. Happiness, okay. I didn't hear that one. Quality of life, okay, yeah. Well, you're hitting on these high-level affective outcomes, which is great. Regardless of the outcomes that people want to achieve, we still want sustainable change. So that's a thread between this presentation and the last presentation. And the other thread is what drives sustainable change. It's the choices that keep people consistent with their overarching goals. So consistent choices is what people need to achieve and maintain the desired outcomes that they care about. I want to propose to you that there's two different pathways to achieving consistent choices. Now, there's two overarching pathways. There's probably more than that, but there's a perfection pathway or an imperfection pathway, and we're going to start the presentation by talking about the path of perfection. And to do that, I want to tell you about Pat. Pat is 43. She's married. She has 2 kids. She's a little overweight. She goes to her clinician every year, and this year, at her clinician's office, she was encouraged to exercise more. And the clinician talked about the affective, wonderful benefits that she could have through exercising, and she was engaged and she bought in. And she made her exercise plan. She was going to exercise Monday through Friday in the gym at 5:30 p.m. for 30 minutes at high-intensity exercise. Now, to make this happen, she was setting an alarm at 4:45, so at that point, she would have time to kind of shut down her day of work, change her clothes, and drive to the gym. Now, one thing I didn't tell you was that she's in a carpool, and her designated carpool time is in the morning, so she could afford to have her gym, her gym workout be at the end of the day. Well, week 1, she hit those exercise goals Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, week 2. Week 3, Monday. Tuesday on week 3 at 4:43, 2 minutes before her alarm's gonna go off, she gets a call from one of the other carpool parents who has an emergency and needs her to pick up the kids. It was a carpool snafu, and she was really distraught. She knew she couldn't get to the gym, and she didn't do any exercise because she had to pick up the kids. And she viewed it as a fail. For her, success, and for many people, success equates to achieving a precise ideal. Getting to the gym at 5:30 for 30 minutes, exercising at high intensity, or whatever the plan is. You follow the plan. But when it comes to precision, when something goes awry, that's all it takes for everything to come tumbling down. Right? Isn't that how it works? And why is this happening? It's happening because of all or nothing thinking. We've been taught that we have to hit a bullseye when it comes to healthy eating, exercise, whatever the health behavior is. We think, and our patients think, and society as a whole think, if we don't hit a bullseye, we fail. And that's exactly what Pat thought, and she thought she failed again. So whether we're talking about a carpool snafu, or a last-minute boss request, or meh, and simply not feeling motivated to do whatever you had planned to do, in the pathway of perfection, in all or nothing thinking, life bursts the bubble, and all of people's and patients' plans and goals go right down the drain. So how did we get here? This is a really important question. The red lines reflect what we've been socialized, educated, indoctrinated to believe when it comes to this question. As you see, it's bullseye hitting that we've been taught. And this is a normative belief system. This is the greater belief system in society, and it's so embedded in our psyche, we could consider it as a mental shortcut or a heuristic. We just go there. We can't do the all, then we do the nothing. And the rigid ideals and gold standards get relayed through research, doctor's orders, apps, the media, influencers, and of course, that's why Pat made the choice that she made. And despite this being what's normative and what most people believe, again, nothing's true for everyone, it is literally a cognitive distortion. So there's something really ironic about that. And if we want to think about this within healthcare, we know that healthcare by necessity is a prescription-based culture and system. So we have to understand how deeply embedded all or nothing is within the system. Now, I've been talking about the pathway of perfection, but this is also what I call a decision disruptor. And decision disruptors are the inclinations, impulses, often unconscious, that when something goes awry with our plans, like it happened with Pat, we immediately go to a thought or an immediate reaction that is not optimal, but it's what we've been taught. Now, we just talked about perfection. Let's talk about another decision disruptor, which is temptation. Now, I want to be very clear when I talk about temptation that I'm not talking about addiction. That is a specific niche of experience that this doesn't address, that needs its own solutions. But temptation does refer to this visceral pull, the glistening chocolate cake over there and the want to have it, or the comfy couch with the clicker to turn on our favorite show on Netflix that we want to watch. So it's a visceral pull. Now, what we now know from new research because of how the brain works and the new theories that have been designed out of this research is that when we come to these points of temptation, we're used to thinking that it's this couch or the cake that's pulling us and trying to seduce us. But the research shows that the reason why we feel so tempted, it's not what's sitting out there, it's what's inside here and our past experiences with the behaviors and the experiences, who we were with. Were they positive or negative experiences? If we're talking about eating the cake, what was the texture and the feel and the taste and the smell, and who were we with? And what were we celebrating? And we bring all of these experiences to these moments of temptation, and that can be a very empowering insight that people can have at these decision disruptors related to temptation. Now we're going to go on to rebellion. Rebellion, I'm sure I wouldn't have to say anything about that as a decision disruptor. It's when someone, even on their own accord, decides on an eating plan. They pick the eating plan. They join the gym themselves. They, make a plan to run on their own. Regardless, it feels like something they should do. And research and theory support the notion that whenever human beings feel that their freedom has been taken away, even if it's been self-imposed, we are highly motivated to reclaim it. So if I decided that I was going to run 3 days a week for 40 minutes because I should do it, and then I'm coming to that point of decision, and I don't want to do it because it feels like I should, my rebellion is to say, screw you, run, I'm not going, and that happens again and again and again, and this is a very real decision disruptor. The next one is accommodation. And I want to tell you a client story to help you understand what this refers to. I was working with someone who had made changes in eating that she was she had deep ownership over. There was no rebellion. This was hers. She loved the changes. She felt great from them. But every year, she had this 3-family reunion where the families meet up and they enjoy their history together and their different generations. And everyone brings really special food. Now, at this particular weekend, it had been a few weeks in from following her eating plan. Again, she came up with it herself. She owned it. She wanted to do it. And her, this very dear friend from her history came up to her and offered her this very special food. that was absolutely not on the plan that my client was following. While she wasn't doing all or nothing thinking, she didn't need to rebel because she had no desire to eat it. But what she did experience was the need to feel like she was taking care of her friend and responding to her friend's hard work and the celebratory needs of the group. And so she ate this food and she really felt pretty bad, not as much inside of her body as much as in her psyche and her own feelings about the plan that she had been successfully following until that point. So accommodation refers to when we subsume our own self-care lifestyle needs always, not sometimes, because sometimes is good, always behind the needs of other people and the other projects in our lives, from work or volunteering or whatever it is. And so accommodation is another decision disruptor. So perfection, which we talked about, actually creates the conditions for the other three to thrive. Perfection leaves no room for compromise when it comes to the cookie. It's the whole box or nothing, and it leaves temptation, rebellion, and accommodation to fight over the spoils. So perfection makes everything worse. Temptation, rebellion, accommodation, perfection. What does that spell? Trap. So these are the 4 core decision traps that I have seen in coaching people in these questions over the last few decades. And again, what happens is that they, to a great extent, they have to do with how we've been socialized to think about the behaviors we're changing, about how we should be good sons, fathers, wives, daughters, friends. And they arise and pull our decisions under right at the moment that we're needing to make a strategic choice, usually when there's a conflict with what we had planned to do. And if these ideas resonate with you, whether yourself as an individual or your patients, I welcome you to take a picture of that QR code, because it leads to a quiz where you can take the quiz about these traps and find out if any of them are sticky areas for you. I'll go back because it looks like someone wants to take it. So when we're talking about the path of perfection and all or nothing thinking, whether it's perfection itself or rebellion or any of the other decision traps, in all or nothing thinking, what happens is that our plans and goals and the path to lasting change just disappear. So I want to pause here, and I want to ask you in your table to talk about which of these decision traps you have found most prevalent and problematic, either in your own life or in your patients. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk about this. Okay. So I'm curious. Let's see. I'm going to call them out by their names. And it doesn't matter, you know, who you were all talking about, whether it's what you see in clinic or in your families or whatever. But I'm just curious. I'm going to go through each of them, the 4, and I want you to raise your hands if that is the biggest one, the single biggest trap, decision trap. So how many people felt that temptation was the biggest one when it comes? Okay, so most people know, okay? How many people felt rebellion was the biggest one? Okay, I hope you're all gonna vote. I have video cameras seeing who's gonna participate or not. Accommodation, how many people? Whoa, okay, and perfection. So interestingly, accommodation's number 1, perfection's number 2, rebellion's number 3, and temptation is number 4. So that's just interesting information to think about. And we can talk more about it when we get to the interaction. Well, actually, no. Why do we think accommodation is the biggest one in this group? Can anyone share their thoughts? Maybe stand up and go to a microphone? Because I think this is really important, and this is really our biggest time to talk about it. We're very polite and help our friends. Do you feel that that is regional, or do you think it's everywhere? You don't know? Everywhere. Anyone else have a different? What about perfection? Yes, go ahead. Too much to do. Okay. And duty, so accommodation, absolutely. So I'm going to tell you a story that's in the book. After I was doing an event for clinicians, the man who hired me took me, I was talking to some people after my talk, and he kind of grabbed my elbow and he took me over here and he said, Michelle, I have to tell you, oh, the other thing I forgot to tell you is there was a brand new facility with a gym in it, built in it for everyone to use. And he said, I never go to the gym because I always feel like I have too much work to do. And he said, and when I do go to the gym, I try to hide behind the pillars so that other people can't see that I'm walking away from my work to go exercise. Accommodation in a nutshell. So there's different versions of accommodation, and the 2 big ones are I need to take care of other people, and my own self-care needs are consistently less important than everyone else's, or I have too much to do. And these are, you can see how when you're at a point of choice or something's about to go awry, how these disruptors just derail and usurp you making any type of adaptive choice. And one of the biggest things I hope you take away from both presentations is that this moment of decision, the right now, this is the crucial point, but we haven't been taught to think about it as the lever of sustainability that it really is. So what I've been talking about so far represents what I call the old story of behavior change. And it doesn't work for most people. It's simplistic, it's outdated, it's often based on convention instead of science, and it misguides many, many people. So it's time for a new story, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Now, at the beginning, we talked about the 2 pathways to consistent decision-making, the perfection pathway or the pathway of imperfection, and that's where we're at right now. We're at this beautiful fork in the road where we're going to start going toward the imperfect. The new story of behavior change appreciates and addresses our daily realities. And what are our daily realities like? There's always a tornado of to-dos, right? There's always so many things, so no wonder we feel overwhelmed so often. But that's a really important thing. In order to help people, help ourselves, help our patients, help our communities create changes that can survive the throes of the tornado of to-dos, we actually have to understand that that is the reality and the context that these behaviors have to survive within. So having that as our baseline is really important. The new story of behavior change also designs solutions to support our brain's innate decision-making system or our executive functioning. There are three primary executive functions that get talked about in the literature on lifestyle change. And this is something most people don't know about. This is emerging science. We've got cognitive flexibility, or what I'm calling flexible thinking. We've got working memory, which is the transitory space where we hold and work with information. And we've got inhibition, in layman's terms, that you can think of that as a type of self-control and the ability to inhibit ourselves from doing something. And I talk about all three of these and how we can better support them. But in today's presentation, I'm only going to focus on one of the three that I talk about in the book, and that's flexible thinking. So the new story of behavior change trains individuals, helps them learn how to successfully navigate when plans go awry. Because when don't they? So if our conversations with patients and in our own heads don't get us prepared for these times, then we won't have the belief system and the strategies that can successfully help us navigate this. So let's go back to Pat and let's redo. Everything's the same. All of her biological, demographic information that I told you earlier, and even her exercise plan. Everything is the same, but now she's read the new story of behavior change. So she's as successful week 1 and week 2 and week 3 on Tuesday, and darn it, at 4:43, that same carpool snafu happens. But instead of considering it a fail, because she couldn't get to the gym for 30 minutes and do precisely what she had planned, she considered it a choice point, an opportunity to choose. So yes, in the bottom bubble, which reflects her Tuesday plan, she had planned to go to the gym for 30 minutes and exercise at high intensity. But like often, something happened, something arose. The carpool snafu is what happened to her, because conflicts always arise. But this is an opportunity to reframe it as a choice point. And I want to really focus on that for a minute. So as you know, in the last presentation, we talked about reframing exercise away from medicine to this, whatever metaphor, I call it a treasure chest of immediate positivity, because it changes our perception of it, which will change people's experiences of doing it, literally experience of doing it. In the same way, if we change our perceptions of what's going on when plans go awry, we are more mentally prepared to successfully navigate and negotiate it. So this notion of choice point is very empowering and positive. So in take 1, version 1 of Pat, life burst the bubble and everything went down the drain. In the new story of behavior change, Pat has ownership over her plan, and she pops it herself. Now, popping the plan reflects a metaphor. She's not letting life burst the bubble. She's not letting something else take charge and take over. She's saying, darn it, I can't do it, so I'm going to pop this plan. And that is a metaphorical action that is very empowering for people. But it's more than that. It opens up the options, the logistics. When you pop your plan, You open it up, and when you talk to patients about this, and we'll have an opportunity to do something interactive at the end around this, you want to ask people to start generating alternatives based on the logistics, because plans are all about logistics. So what else, what other options are there? How much, how long, and when else could you fit this in, or when else could you eat something, and what would that be? So in this scenario, Pat knows that she's going to open up her options and play with the possibilities. And this is what flexible thinking that we want to support does. So one option and possibility is she could push dinner back to go to the gym after she drops off the kids. Another option is to follow the dinner routine as planned and walk outside with her partner after dinner for 30 minutes. And another option is to use the bike in the basement before prepping for dinner. Now, this might seem kind of dumbed down or silly to think about this, but literally, this is the answer. And people have not been taught to think this way. So the very nature of trying to generate options and possibilities through a perfectly imperfect lens is what will help people stay the path, and I'm going to tell you about research that supports that. So yes, she had this carpool snafu, and what she did was she chose to follow the dinner as planned. This was the possibility she selected. It's the imperfect option that lets her do something instead of nothing, or what I call the joy choice. The imperfect option is perfectly imperfect, and it lets us do something instead of nothing. What is that the antidote to? All or nothing thinking. We need to slay the all or nothing dragon because it is so deeply embedded in people's brains, and I cannot overstate this. So the new story of behavior change redefines success so that people and patients can finally be successful. Instead of a bullseye where there's one option to succeed, a very precise plan, we want to help people believe that something is better than nothing. Instead of a single red circle on the wall that, is unlikely to hit, we want the whole room to be the target. Anywhere people hit. And again, this might sound silly to talk about, but people really need to be told this information because they don't believe it. And I'll tell you a story in a moment that will exemplify that. So in contrast to the path of lasting change fading out in the pathway of perfection and through all or nothing thinking, when something is better than nothing and people believe that the perfect and perfect option is success, sustainable change happens. So, this is where I would get a question by someone who would say, especially someone in healthcare that would say, but isn't this going to cause bad habits, teaching people that they can do something instead of nothing? And this is a really valid concern. But to address this, I want to share a story about a training I was doing, again with clinicians. And this was early on, and I could tell that this clinician in my audience was very angry. As a speaker, when someone's mad, you just kind of see their faces contort, and you're like, oh no, they hate me, but you gotta keep going anyway and not getting distracted by that. But eventually, she couldn't contain herself anymore, and she stood right up, and she said, how dare you advocate that I compromise my patient treatment? My patients need to exercise at high intensity to manage their chronic illness, and if they do something instead of nothing, they are not going to be successful, they're going to be unhealthy, and I just... she was really offended, and the first time that happens to you, you kind of freak out inside, like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do? Is everyone else going to stand up and start clapping? Or, okay, how do I handle this? Thankfully, some wisdom came into my mind, and I smiled at her and I said, "So how's that working out for you?" And she sat right down. So that is a valid concern. And I hear, and earlier in the first presentation, I know someone else mentioned that people are lazy. Here's the deal. 2 points about that. Number one, the alternative to something is better than nothing hasn't worked for 40 years. It hasn't worked, period. So we may as well trash it out, throw it out because of that, the evidence we have that the alternative doesn't work. The second thing is that I want to address the idea of lazy. You know, there are individual differences, genetic differences when it comes to certain people being more active and more sedentary than other, and we can't control that. But in my work as a health coach, I have come to see the notion that when people say they're lazy, it is really a smokescreen for having been socialized and indoctrinated to think about exercise and changing their diets and other types of self-care choices as shoulds and prescribed all or nothing strategies. And once you remove those things, all of a sudden they have the energy and desire to take care of themselves. People are lazy in a paradigm that deems them lazy if they can't succeed. And that paradigm is only a minority of the people can be successful in that paradigm. Yet, because it's what the magazines cover and it's what a lot of trainings promote and what the research advocates, people believe it's what everyone succeeds with. So those are the 2 comments about that. The new story of behavior change is based on science, not convention. And this is a really important point. So many things that we've been taught, whether you're a coach, a clinician, an organizational well-being professional, are based on convention. I'm not going to go into this. I go into it a lot in the book. For example, habit formation. We have been taught that the notion that if we could offload, we could create automatic habits that we don't have to think about, we wouldn't be tempted or have to rebel against, that is just something we should all be striving for with our exercise and our healthy eating. But guess what? Not only is there very little research to support habit formation actually leading to sustainable change, that's even true for a simple behavior like flossing. And the cutting-edge habit researchers are actually rethinking whether the habit paradigm is even valuable for complex behaviors like exercise and healthy eating. But that's an example of how convention and popular things that make sense take over and not the ones based on science. So the new story of behavior change is based on science. And I want to show you 2 quotes. And I already told you a little bit about this focus group study where we collected data on low active participants and high active participants. I'm going to show you 2 quotes. One's going to be on the left and one's going to be on the right. And I want you to very quickly tell each other which one you think represents the high active group, okay? So here's the first quote. You have to do this at this time. And this is the second quote. If we have to spend time helping with the homework, the workout needs to go to the wayside for today. Talk amongst yourself, right or left. Which is the active participant? And why? Okay, how many people, raise your hands if you think the active participant is I always forget. So that is on your left. Is on the left. The active participant on the left, raise your hands. How many think the active participant's on the right? Holy moly. I can leave right now. You guys know the answers. Yes, the majority is correct. Here's from the full comment. I feel like it's a lot of pressure for me with exercise to perform well and do well and commit to that time and schedule I can't commit. And the high active, if we have to spend time helping with the homework, the workout needs to go to the wayside for today, and so be it, you have to give and take. Now, I want to give you kudos, because most people I speak to that so far have guessed the opposite, despite what we've already talked about. But as you can know, these comments deeply suggest the differences between the strong oak and the reed, right? Flexibility is potent. It's the alternative. It offers us the option of going against the all or nothing belief system. Because when people have choices, that is inherently autonomous. When people themselves are able to choose, do I want to go to the gym after dinner? Maybe I'll do a little dancing in the kitchen. Maybe I'll take a walk after dinner. When people feel that they have choices, it means they're in charge, and there is no should at all in that. There's no rebelling. There's curiosity, which is intrinsically motivating, as well as it's a positive emotion that expands our thinking and can help us think more creatively at these choice points. But there's even research to show that very little has benefit. This is just a single study of 3 seconds of weightlifting a day can increase bicep strength. This was in the New York Times a couple months ago. But there are many examples of studies like this. And we don't need a study to know that if someone's trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, that eating one piece of fruit and 1 vegetable instead of the 5 of each they had planned is better than nothing. So these notions are so important that, we already talked about the Surgeon General's report. Something is better than nothing, and that is the new science-based mantra. But then I would have someone say, and I live with this someone, but sticking to the plan works for me. There are individual differences when it comes to this. The new story of behavior change is not for everyone. But I propose that it is for most people, because most people have the kinds of hubbub in their daily lives where they need to know how to navigate these choice points when plans go awry. So it's important to honor differences, and it's important to ask and try to assess whether someone is a sticking to the plan type of person, or what I call a habiter, or an unhabiter like me, who has trouble sticking to the plan and needs an alternative strategy. I cannot say this enough. There is so much research coming out showing the value, suggesting that when people have coping strategies when it comes to healthy eating and exercise, compared to trying to do it right or trying to stick to the plan, that the flexibility beats it out every time. So this is the emerging evidence, and it's mounting. Flexibility is what equals feasibility. People have to have it has to be feasible to stick with a behavior change. And flexibility for the people who need it is what makes it happen, and that is what leads to consistent decision making. It gives people grace. It gives us grace. And I want to just do a thought experiment. You know how all or nothing thinking in the realm of exercise and eating, that it's kind of the go-to? Let's think if we had that same belief system in every other area of our life. The dentist office calls the day before our appointment, and they need to reschedule. We ditch that sucker, right? Because they're messing up our schedule. We're not doing the all. Or our child isn't eating the broccoli we cooked for dinner, so we starve them for a week. We don't bring all or nothing thinking to other areas of our lives. It's very unique to exercise and eating. So we need to get people to rethink, relearn that something is better than nothing. And I was giving a lecture at the University of Texas just a couple weeks ago. I put this pushback, which I invited and always invite. This professor, esteemed professor, said to me literally, okay, Michelle, I'm going to push back. Come on. Do we really need to teach people that something is better than nothing? We've been talking about this for years. Let me tell you about Katie. Katie was a client of mine. She reached out right after New Year's, immediately started talking about weight loss and how she wanted to lose 20 pounds and how she needed to do this and would I work with her. And fortunately, I was completely full. And so I put her off and I said, I'm really sorry, I can't take you on as a client. She kept following up with me and writing me emails about needing to do things, and her comments were very grandiose and lots of all or nothing thinking. After a year, she wore me down. And I took her on as a client. And for the first week, she set very ambitious goals that are even too embarrassing to say. And she didn't come close to meeting them. And she came to the next session and she said she was a failure. And as a coach, and this might be different, I'm not a clinician, but as a coach, we're not supposed to tell people they should do things differently. You want them to learn on their own. So I didn't say, why the heck are you doing that? But she kept doing it. She kept coming back, talking about how much she failed. Finally, at about the 5th session, I decided to address the elephant in the room. And I said, Katie, we have talked about the new guidelines for physical activity. Why are you continuing to do this thing that sets you up to fail? Pause, silence. And here's what she said. Michelle, I've heard everything you've said. I understand it. I just don't want to believe it. And she didn't. That was my fail, not hers. That's one anecdote. I don't know if you recognize that in anyone, but I got an email again. Lots of things are happening because of my book launch. I got this email from someone who'd been working in the field of health and well-being, and I'm going to read it because it's got really important information. In my 30-plus career, I've always tried to help people, healthy and ill, find a realistic path. It's hard to break through the all-or-nothing mentality that is fueled by so many sources: athletic coaches, fads, clinicians, and so-called influencers. Many people resist thinking through and experimenting with a different approach, even though all or nothing has never worked for them. It's astounding. So my answer to this esteemed professor, do we really need to teach people that something is better than nothing? The answer is, you can guess it, yes, yes, and yes. But we need to do more than just slay the all-or-nothing dragon, because in a way we have been trying to do that for decades. We need to move people. We need to touch their hearts. And notice that I didn't touch my microphone when I did that. I was told that I shouldn't do that. So the new story of behavior change frames the perfect, imperfect option in something is better than nothing. In inspiring and purpose-driven ways, people make choices based on emotion. Any amount of self-care amplifies our health and well-being and allows us to be and do our best. Joy reflects feeling a match between the current moment right now and who we are in our core. So when we pick the joy choice, the perfect and perfect option, we are doing more. We're not just picking an in-the-moment decision that favors our greater exercising and eating goals. We are actualizing who we are. And that is why we call it the Joy Choice. Thank you very much. So let's open it for some questions, and then we can shift afterwards into the packet of stuff. Does anyone have thoughts or concerns about this? And I do welcome pushback, so.
I've tried to counsel patients. First of all, I think some people that are all or nothing are using it for an excuse, and I know that they say, well, if I can't do it, then I'm not going to do it at all. And if I can't break through that, then I can't break through that. But for some of the people who want the all or nothing, but also it's not realistic, I've always thought of, and I was telling these guys, you know, I want you to buy a month at a glance calendar and buy some smiley faces. And every day you exercise, put a smiley face on there. But it's a yes, no. It's not 45 minutes. It's not this and that and the other thing. The answer is, did I exercise or didn't I exercise that day? So that if you have a bad day, if it's late or whatever, and you are one of those people who has to stick with a consistent schedule, fine, do 2 minutes. Do something.
That's right. That is what we need to be teaching people. And because it is so deeply embedded in people's psyche, you know, like Katie and like the person who wrote me, we have to figure out how to hook people. Here's an example of someone told me about her uncle who was going through cancer treatment, and he told her that his doctor had wanted him to exercise to help with the nausea, and she said, so what are you doing? And he said, nothing, all I can do is walk around the block. That is how deeply embedded that a cancer patient doesn't feel that walking around the block is sufficient to be active. So it's so deeply embedded, and that's why we need to really shake things up when it comes to this question. What else? What other questions or thoughts do you have? That was a great example of how he helps his patients think something is better than nothing.
So this is kind of how it goes for a lot of us. We don't have a lot of time in office visits. And so, you know, we end up trying to offer solutions. And sometimes patients back you into a corner. You know, you make suggestions, how about this or how about that? And each time it's, no, I can't do that, or no, I can't do that. I can't walk because my knees hurt, and I can't swim because I don't drive and I can't get to the pool. And it's kind of like that. You go through about a half dozen, and then you go down this rabbit hole and there's nowhere else to go.
Right.
And you don't really have time to train the person in their mode of thinking.
Yes.
And you as a clinician just kind of give up and move on.
Right.
So that's the reality of what we run into a lot.
And that's a really important, I appreciate you saying that. So, you know, how do we make this more efficient? That's really an important question in clinic. How do we get at the questions and answers and underail the people? And again, that type of person, you might know them for a while and know that they're not going to be open to anything, so eventually you stop maybe, or someone would stop trying to suggest things. But I think if we had some kind of brief assessment that helped people identify, do you think it has to look like this? Do you think it has to be, instead of maybe inquiring, what about swimming or what about this, I would suggest that you shift to identifying whether they have a belief system that is stuck in all or nothing thinking. So if you were going to swim, for example, how long do you think would be worth doing? Or if you were going to walk, how long do you think it would be worth doing? So what we want to do you remember, similar to the last presentation where I said, we're not trying to get people to sustain change, we're trying to get them to rebrand their experiences in their brain. With this topic, we want to help us and our patients identify whether they're stuck in the all or nothing thinking that, again, they've been trained to have in society. So that's what I would do. I would shift the strategy and then not try to even identify a type of a physical activity or a type of a diet if people are reticent. Try to help them understand that that type of thinking is what we've been taught, but the emerging research, again, using the research as your justification shows that really something is better than nothing, and that's where I want us to get. So I guess that's what I would try. What other thoughts or concerns?
I think this is actually right up my alley, kind of something has just kind of confirmed some of the stuff that I've been actually learning this past year. I went through a time period where like exercising, healthy eating and stuff, like mine, I've always been an active person, but I had a bad relationship with food in particular, and mental health wise, I felt like that was how I treated my mental health. And I think a lot of people have that type of a struggle and stuff. And over the years, like my husband, he would sit there and talk about this girl that she was a personal trainer, but really focused in on kind of like just being a mom, trying to balance life, but also kind of this type of breaking that all or nothing thinking. And I probably cannot even count on both hands how many times he had told me about this. And I kept telling him, I was like, I know everything. I know what I need to do and stuff. And it was finally at one point that I kind of felt like I was broken down at a certain extent. And finally I gave into it. And I'll tell you what, it was amazing because it's totally changed how I think about things and how I've actually interacted with patients as well. And it does get frustrating, when you sit there and you have patients that come in that, for example, I had a patient that he came in, had heart disease, didn't exercise, the way that he was thinking and stuff, like just a different kind of mindset and everything. And I tried for so long just to try to change his mindset and stuff. And I did realize that sometimes you're not always successful in that aspect of things, but the important things is to keep trying and trying and trying. And maybe at some point they'll be broken down enough to where they'll be receptive to what you're telling them. I mean, I've been told for years that with smoking, one of the most effective ways is us telling people, to quit smoking and stuff. And I think it's just kind of being persistent and try to be patient. It's not the easiest, but it's all we can do.
Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead. We have a couple minutes. You'll be the last question for now, and then we'll transition to the worksheet.
Many large corporations have put fitness facilities in their buildings. As you go around and talk to healthcare facilities, has there been any inclination for healthcare providers to accommodate fitness for their employees? Because everything we've talked about today is what providers should tell their patients, but it's kind of a physician, cure thyself.
Yes, no, you're right. I mean, it depends on the system. I think as an employer, health systems have about the biggest pressures or among the biggest pressures when it comes to these issues. And so, my long answer is that most don't, as far as I know, but I think, there's an irony that when you take time away to take care of yourself, you have that much more energy to do good work and to give to other people and your patients. So you're speaking to the accommodation related to work, but also the structural issues and the challenges that you don't have any control over. And, this is where I'm trying to remember his name. You guys probably know his name. There's a physician out of Stanford who talks about changing the health system so that, what? Well, that's okay. Anyway, I know there's someone who's specifically trying to work on the structural level, and it is a reality. And healthcare is in a tough time right now. So I guess the longer answer would be, I would propose that you all should shrink what you think you need to do to the 2 or 3 minutes that we're talking about with your patients, and just start there and know that you're doing something. I have a colleague who's a physician, and he told me that at lunch he walks out the door of his office and he walks around the parking lot twice. And he said he was a little embarrassed at first when he started doing it. It's not a huge parking lot. And then he went back in. He said, you do what you can do when you can. And so I think it would help, everyone, and you could even model it better to your patients and tell them what you're doing because of the challenges. So it's really tough. These are not easy. Like I said at the very beginning, change is hard and complex, and part of it is because of the context in which we are trying to take care of ourselves. So thanks everyone for their wonderful questions and comments. We have enough time to go through this. This is the kind of thing that you don't have time to go through with your patients, but I encourage you to, here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to think about doing it as yourself, as someone who needs this, or for a typical patient. We're going to skip the first page, which says decision traps, because we've already talked about that. And what this is, and we're also going to skip the picture with the bubbles because we don't have time to fill it in, but this is like our life context, like all the bubbles that just rise and change and move around. That's the context that many of us, have to fit our healthy eating plans into. I want you to go to page 4. And again, I'm going to take you through the process that's in the book, the POP process. I didn't define what POP stood for. It's a wonderful acronym, and we're going to get there. But first, what I want you to do, the first part is we create our ideal plan in a motivation bubble. So I want you to write down, is it a healthy, again, this is for yourself or a typical patient that you'd be working with. Would you write down healthy eating or exercise more? So decide which, you're going to follow this through the whole exercise. So decide which one and write it in the top bubble on the left side. Then, below it are 3 nails that tend to pop the bubble. I'd like you to, I just realized I have this on. I would like you to write down 3 typical things that tend to derail pop the bubble. They can be beliefs, they can be other people, what tends to burst the bubble. That's kind of in theory. When you're done with that, I'd like you to get very specific on the right side. And if you chose a healthy eating or if you chose exercise, I just want you to write it kind of a specific example of a plan in the bubble, like getting to the gym at 5:30 like Pat, or hiking in the mountains, or walking with my family, or whatever at a certain, try to come up with a specific time, day. I want you to just, again, if this is a patient, then make it up. And if it's you, pick something that you would typically pick. After that, oops, why isn't this moving? Let's go to the next page. So this is where a choice point happens. The bottom bubble, and you don't have to rewrite it, but that is where the plan you just wrote in, that is where your plan would be, that would then get derailed, try to get derailed, would face a challenge or a choice point. So right in the top bubble, a typical, what we used to call challenges or barriers, but now we're going to think about as a choice point. The thing that bumps up against your plan most often. Can anyone share what is a typical choice point for either a patient or themselves? Late night, tired in the morning, absolutely. There are many. So here we are at POP on the next page. So POP is this metaphorical action where we're popping our bubble. We're not letting life burst it. We ourselves are popping it because it's unworkable, but we're not going to let life take charge because we're taking charge. But it's also an acronym. And acronyms are important for helping us navigate the in the moment, right now choice points, and they help our working memory. They support our working memory because our working memory can only hold a couple things in it at a time and work with it. So POP is an acronym. Oh no, it's a choice point. POP. I'm going to pop my plan. What does POP stand for? Pause. You know, the pausing, yeah, as you all know, I didn't make up the wisdom of the pause. It's been around for thousands of years. Pausing is what lets us create a space and get some distance. And and open up your options and play supports flexible thinking because we're thinking about this as fun. And that might sound kind of strange, but how we frame things determines how we experience them. So there is no reason that we can't think of coming up with options as something creative that we can do and a problem to solve. And then the third part is pick the joy choice. So I'm going to go through each one. Pause. This is what I say to myself when I use POP. Remember, this is a choice point. And then I name whatever trap I might be facing. Now, I've been using it for things non-related to healthy eating and exercise. I've just been using it when I'm stressed out or something. And so I will name my stress. And if any of you are fans of Dan Siegel like I am, the neuroscientist, you know that when you name something, you tame it in your brain. So naming, I see you rebellion, I see you accommodation, the very act of doing that helps your prefrontal cortex navigate with the amygdala emotional feelings you might be having. And it helps you harness your attention for the next step, which is opening up your options. So you came up with a choice point, you had a plan. Now you're at the second part, the O of POP, which is open up your options and play. I want you to generate 3 possibilities, 3 perfectly imperfect possibilities. Does that make sense? This can be hard when you aren't used to thinking in this way. But once you start to think in this way, it creates a fluidity. And this is flexible thinking. I'm seeing some people still writing. And then I'm going to move on to the next and final part of POP, which is picking the joy choice. The top part, you don't have to rewrite your choice point in there. That's the top part. The bottom part is what you picked, the perfect imperfect option that lets you do something instead of nothing, that lets you take care of yourself so that you can have more energy and enthusiasm for the other people and projects in your life. So pick the one of the options for today that would make the most sense or that you think for your patient would make the most sense. And now, I want to end by just asking you, what are the 2 most important ideas or tactics that you will take away into your own life or into your clinical practice, and why these? And I want you to talk among your group about that for a couple minutes. Can I hear a couple of the things people, one of the things that you're going to take away?
I think in general we try to solve, as one of the other providers said, we try and solve their problems. Well, you could do this, well, you could do that, and just change that way of thinking to say, what is something you think you can do? So you open it up to them and say, okay, that's great. What if you can't do that day? Would you be okay with, 2 minutes or, something like that, instead of trying to solve, because that's partially what we do and why they come to us, but help them come to it so they maybe own it a little bit better.
That's great, thank you. What other thoughts do people have?
Okay, so I think giving a personal example of how it's helped you, so then they can internalize that, how it might help them. So I got a comment and then a question.
Yeah.
So I broke my leg during the pandemic. I was in solitary confinement and rehab in 2020 before we had a vaccine. I was in a lot of pain, and what I had to do, they kept saying, keep a positive attitude, so I had to turn off the TV, no COVID news, couldn't listen to what was going on, listen to positive music that I liked that was upbeat and had a good beat, and some comedy like Tim Hawkins or somebody you like as a comedian to laugh. And that really helped me, and I did like dance walks to music. I mean, I did my PT, but then I put my own little spin on it. I think there's prancercise on the internet, YouTube, whatever makes you happy. So that's what worked for me, and I did want to ask you about, do you ever ask them about playing music or exercising to music? Because that really helped me.
Yeah, no, research shows that exercising to music is something that helps cultivate intrinsic motivation. It makes it enjoyable. That's evidence-based, but I know that in my own life I have found that to be true too. And in fact, the only way I can exercise intensely when I choose to, is listening to high-energy music that I actually like to dance to. So yeah, asking people what they would need to enjoy it. And that's, again, you're asking them to solve their problem and to tap into the experiences and wisdom that they have. So, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I am a proponent of a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. I know it was mentioned at our table listening to podcasts. I know that I listen to books on tape, and that is a motivation for me to get out and move.
Yeah.
Because I can listen to something I really want to listen to, and podcasts.
These are nuggets of gold. And talking to your patients about that, is letting them know what you do is really helpful. So that's great. And it looks like there's someone else up there.
Yeah, it's just a little different area. But I've heard military leaders say that battle plans work right up until the time of the first gunshot.
Yeah.
And then things have to change. Have you thought about training military leaders in this technique?
You know what, you're not the first. That is a wonderful analogy, and that's exactly what this is about. This is about training people to think in tactical ways, but also in ways that support the way their executive functioning works, which is cool, and means that you can talk about the science, which I think people want to know. I mean, I think people want to know when you're suggesting something, whether it's backed by research. And when it comes to behavior change techniques, I mean, I think a lot of people might assume, or you may or may not have had training in that area, but it's really helpful when you have to say, and guess what, this is what emerging research shows is more helpful than the other, than all or nothing thinking, for example. So it looks like we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much for a wonderful opportunity to share.